Max and Sarah Collins, Halt airport boarding, hidden nerve gas exposed. The explosion that shook the baggage depot at Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport at 5:47 a.m. wasn't accidental. Detective Sarah Collins knew it the moment she stepped onto the scene, observing debris scattered across the concrete floor and the acrid smell of C4 explosives still hanging in the humid Georgia air. 3 employees injured, no confirmed deaths, reported Federal Agent Marcus Wheeler, approaching through the smoke with a dust mask covering half his face. But there's something strange about this, Collins. The explosion was surgically directed. It specifically destroyed the ventilation control systems in this sector. Sarah adjusted Max's black tactical harness, her fingers automatically checking the secure fit of his body camera and radio transmitter. The 6-year-old Belgian Malinois was scanning the air with an intensity she'd rarely witnessed in their 6 years of partnership. His chocolate-brown coat bristled slightly, and his normally disciplined posture showed signs of genuine agitation. "Max, what are you sensing, boy?" Sarah murmured, running her hand along the dog's muscular neck. The familiar gesture usually calmed both of them, but today Max remained tense, his dark eyes fixed on something beyond the obvious destruction. "Show me what's wrong." Instead of heading toward the twisted metal and scattered concrete where any normal explosive residue would linger, Max padded purposefully toward an intact ventilation grate mounted high on the depot's eastern wall. His movements were deliberate, almost urgent, as he positioned himself directly beneath the steel grating and began his distinctive alert sequence, a low, rhythmic bark that Sarah had learned to interpret like a second language. But this wasn't his standard explosive detection alert. This was something else entirely. "Wheeler, I need you to initiate immediate evacuation of the South Terminal," Sarah said, her voice cutting through the ambient noise of emergency vehicles and shouting personnel. "Full evacuation now!" Wheeler's eyebrows shot up above his safety glasses. "What? Collins, the explosion happened here in the depot, not in the passenger areas. We've contained the scene." "Because my partner is telling me the real threat isn't what we can see." Sarah grabbed her radio, switching to the emergency frequency. "Central, this is Detective Collins, badge 2847. I'm calling for immediate emergency evacuation of the South Terminal and requesting hazmat response team deployment." The dispatcher's voice crackled back. "Collins, confirm your emergency status. Are you reporting a code-red chemical threat?" Sarah watched Max's behavior intensify. The dog was now scratching at the wall beneath the ventilation grate, his movements becoming more frantic with each passing second. In 6 years, she'd never seen him react this way to a scene. "Affirmative, Central. Code red chemical threat. South Terminal evacuation is not a drill." As Sarah spoke into her radio, she became aware of something that made her blood turn to ice water in her veins. 3 cleaning staff members working near the damaged ventilation system had begun coughing, not the dust-induced coughing she'd expect from debris, but something deeper, more distressed. A Delta Airlines flight attendant walking through the area suddenly stopped, pressing her hand to her throat and gasping for clean air. The pieces clicked together in Sarah's mind with terrifying clarity. "Max, back off! Get back!" Sarah shouted, scooping the 70-pound dog into her arms with the adrenaline-fueled strength that comes with genuine fear. "General evacuation! We have an active chemical agent!" The wailing of evacuation sirens immediately filled the massive space of the airport, echoing off the high ceilings and drowning out the normal sounds of morning air traffic. Sarah could see emergency teams mobilizing through the large windows, their yellow hazmat suits creating a surreal, almost apocalyptic scene against the backdrop of arriving aircraft. As she carried Max to what she hoped was a safe distance, Sarah's mind raced through the implications. Someone had orchestrated this with military precision. The explosion in the depot was clearly meant to draw attention away from the real attack. The timing was surgical, designed to coincide with the morning rush when the South Terminal would be packed with business travelers and vacationing families. But the question that chilled her most wasn't about the perpetrator's methods or motives. It was simpler and more personal. Who knew that she and Max would be responding to this specific call at this exact time? Standing in the morning sunlight outside the depot, still holding Max protectively against her chest, Sarah felt the weight of that question settle over her like a cold shadow. Someone had planned for them to be here. Someone had wanted them to find whatever Max had detected, or someone had wanted them to be caught in the middle of it. "We're going to figure this out, partner," she whispered into Max's alert ears, feeling his steady heartbeat against her tactical vest. "Like we always do. But I think this time, we might be the ones being hunted." Max looked up at her with those intelligent brown eyes that had never failed to provide comfort through their years together. But today, for the first time, Sarah saw something new in his gaze, a wariness that perfectly matched her own growing certainty that this case would test everything they thought they knew about trust, loyalty, and survival. Dr. James Morrison emerged from the South Terminal's hazmat zone, looking like a man who'd stared into the abyss and seen it stare back. The FBI's lead chemical weapons specialist stripped off his protective helmet with hands that weren't quite steady, revealing sweat-dampened hair and eyes that held the particular horror reserved for those who understand exactly how close disaster had come. "Sarin gas," he announced to the assembled emergency response team, his voice carrying the flat tone of someone delivering a death sentence. "Military-grade, weaponized concentration. Enough to kill or permanently disable every single person in the South Terminal's departure wing." Sarah felt the world tilt slightly on its axis. How long was it being dispersed? Based on the residue patterns and concentration levels, at least 2 hours, maybe longer. Morrison pulled out a tablet showing thermal imaging of the terminal's ventilation system. The delivery mechanism was sophisticated. Pressurized canisters connected directly to the HVAC system, programmed to release during peak morning traffic. Max remained restless beside Sarah, his nose working constantly despite being hundreds of yards from the contaminated zone. His ears swiveled like radar dishes, tracking sounds and scents that humans couldn't detect. Even here, in what should have been clean air, he maintained the hyper-alert posture that meant danger still lurked nearby. "Doctor, if it was dispersing for 2 hours, why aren't we looking at mass casualties?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. Because the concentration was being gradually increased. Whoever planned this wanted maximum exposure at exactly 8:15 a.m., when Flight 447 to Miami would be boarding with a full passenger load. Morrison's expression darkened further. "We found 5 separate delivery points throughout the terminal. This wasn't terrorism. This was planned genocide." The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. Someone had engineered a chemical weapons attack designed to kill thousands of innocent people, timed to coincide with the busiest travel period of the day. But before she could fully process the magnitude of what they'd prevented, a familiar voice interrupted her thoughts. "Outstanding work, Collins. Absolutely outstanding." Sarah turned to see Captain Robert Hayes approaching, his usual commanding presence somehow diminished by the morning's events. In 12 years of working under Hayes, she'd learned to read his moods like weather patterns. But today, something felt off. His smile seemed forced, and there was a tension in his shoulders that didn't match his congratulatory words. "Sir, we were just following standard protocol," Sarah replied, studying her superior's face. "Max detected an anomaly and we responded accordingly." "But how specifically did you know to check the ventilation systems?" Hayes pressed, his tone casual, but his eyes intense. "What made you suspect chemical weapons rather than conventional explosives?" The question struck Sarah as odd. In all their years working together, Hayes had never questioned her operational methods so directly. "Max's training includes chemical detection, sir. His alert pattern was different from what we'd expect with standard explosives." Hayes nodded, but Sarah caught him exchanging a meaningful glance with Agent Wheeler, who had positioned himself slightly behind and to the left, a tactical position she recognized. Max's low growling confirmed her growing unease. "Captain," Sarah said carefully, Is there something about this incident that I should know? Nothing beyond what we've already discussed, Hayes replied, but his answer came too quickly, too rehearsed. I'm just trying to understand our response protocols for the after-action report. Max's growling intensified, and Sarah noticed the dog's focus had shifted entirely to Hayes. In 6 years of partnership, Max had never shown aggression toward anyone in their chain of command. His instincts about people had proven unnaturally accurate, a trait that had saved Sarah's life more than once. Following an impulse she couldn't quite explain, Sarah decided to test her growing suspicions. "Sir, as part of standard decontamination protocol, I need Max to check everyone who was in proximity to the contaminated area. Would you mind if he does a quick scan?" Hayes took an immediate step backward. "That's really not necessary, Collins." "Actually, sir, it is standard protocol." Sarah's hand moved instinctively toward her service weapon. "Anyone who might have been exposed needs to be cleared by our chemical detection unit." As Max approached Hayes, Sarah noticed something that made her blood freeze. A small, almost invisible stain on the captain's left sleeve. Under the harsh airport lighting, it showed a faint greenish tint, the same color she'd seen in Morrison's chemical analysis photos of weaponized sarin residue. "Captain Hayes," Sarah said, her voice steady despite her racing heart, "I'm going to need you to come with me for a complete decontamination screening." Hayes's mask finally slipped completely. The nervous energy she'd sensed transformed into something colder, more dangerous. His hand moved toward his sidearm as his eyes darted toward the terminal exits. "I'm sorry it came to this, Collins," he said quietly. "I really am." Without another word, Hayes bolted toward the parking structure, his years of tactical training evident in his fluid sprint. Sarah reached for her radio, but before she could call for backup, she realized that Agent Wheeler had also vanished, along with the 3 other federal agents who had been part of the response team. "Max, track!" Sarah commanded. As her partner launched into pursuit, Sarah felt the crushing weight of realization settle over her. This wasn't just a terrorist attack that had been thwarted. It was a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of law enforcement, and she and Max had just become the primary targets. Running after Max through the airport's service corridors, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were no longer hunting the criminals. They had become the hunted. The abandoned maintenance hangar at the far edge of Hartsfield-Jackson's cargo area provided the first moment of relative safety Sarah had felt since Hayes's betrayal. Hidden among rusted aircraft parts and forgotten baggage carts, she held Max close while her mind struggled to process the impossible reality. Her own captain had orchestrated a chemical weapons attack designed to kill thousands of innocent people. "Just you and me now, partner," she whispered into Max's warm fur, feeling his steady breathing against her chest, like it's always been, really. Max pressed his muzzle against her neck, sensing her emotional turmoil with the uncanny empathy that had defined their partnership from the very beginning. The gesture triggered a flood of memories Sarah had kept carefully buried, memories of another partnership that had ended in tragedy, and how Max had saved her from drowning in grief and self-doubt. 6 years earlier, Detective Sarah Collins sat in the sterile waiting room of the Atlanta Police Department's K-9 training facility, staring at her hands and trying to ignore the sounds of barking dogs echoing through the corridors. 3 months had passed since Detective Tom Brady's death, 3 months since the shootout in that warehouse where her split-second hesitation had cost her partner his life. "Collins, I want you to meet someone special," said Captain Williams, emerging from the kennel area with a 6-month-old Belgian Malinois puppy trotting beside him. "This is Max. He also lost his partner." Sarah looked down at the young dog, seeing her own pain reflected in his intelligent brown eyes. Max had been partnered with Officer Jake Morrison, a veteran K-9 handler who died in a car accident while responding to an emergency call. Like Sarah, Max was dealing with survivor's guilt, a concept that seemed impossible when applied to a dog, but was undeniably real in his cautious movements and subdued demeanor. Will he be able to work again? Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "That depends," Williams replied, settling into the chair beside her. "You'll heal together, or you won't heal at all. The choice is yours." The first weeks were brutal. Sarah struggled with panic attacks during training exercises, her body reliving Brady's final moments every time she heard gunfire or found herself in tactical situations. Max, meanwhile, showed reluctance to engage fully with his training, holding back as if afraid that commitment would lead to another devastating loss. The breakthrough came during their 6th week of partnership training. Sarah was attempting a building search exercise when the familiar sound of simulated gunfire triggered a massive panic attack. She found herself hyperventilating in a corner of the training facility, completely overwhelmed by flashbacks and guilt. Max, who was supposed to maintain his position until commanded otherwise, abandoned all protocol. The young dog approached Sarah slowly, pressed his solid warmth against her trembling legs, and simply stayed there. His presence became an anchor, pulling her consciousness back from the nightmare of that warehouse and grounding her in the present moment. "He's not supposed to break position," the training supervisor pointed out. "He's not breaking position," Williams observed, watching the scene with quiet understanding. "He's exactly where he needs to be." From that moment, Sarah and Max developed an almost telepathic connection. She learned to read the subtle changes in his ear position, the meaning behind different tail movements, the significance of his various vocal alerts. He, in turn, became attuned to her emotional state, often sensing her stress levels before she recognized them herself. Their first real case together came 8 months later, a drug bust at a shipping warehouse that bore uncomfortable similarities to the location where Brady had died. Sarah felt the familiar panic building as they approached the building, but Max's calm confidence beside her provided the strength she needed to push forward. When they successfully apprehended 3 suspects without incident, Sarah finally understood that she wasn't just working with a dog, she had found a true partner. Present. Sarah opened her eyes, feeling renewed determination coursing through her veins. Max was studying her face with that expression of absolute trust and loyalty that had sustained her through countless dangerous situations. "You knew something was wrong with Hayes from the beginning, didn't you?" she asked softly. Max's ears perked up at the mention of their captain's name, and his lip curled slightly, a reaction Sarah had never seen him display toward anyone in their chain of command. "Your instincts have never failed us. I should have listened." Sarah pulled out her cell phone, hoping against hope that her sister Emma would answer. As an FBI agent based in Washington, Emma represented the only law enforcement contact Sarah could still trust completely. "Emma, thank God you picked up. I need your help desperately." "Sarah, what's wrong? You sound terrified." Emma's voice carried the concern of someone who'd known Sarah her entire life. "There's a conspiracy here in Atlanta, Em. My own captain tried to kill thousands of people with chemical weapons, and now I think I'm being framed." A long pause. When Emma spoke again, her voice had shifted into professional mode. "Sarah, there's something you need to know. There's a national alert out for you and Max. The official report says you're wanted for terrorist sabotage at Hartsfield-Jackson." Sarah felt the world spinning around her. "That's impossible. We stopped the attack. We saved lives." "I believe you," Emma said quickly, "but someone with serious authority is painting a very different picture. They're saying you planted the chemical weapons as part of a domestic terrorism plot." The realization hit Sarah like a physical blow. Hayes hadn't just betrayed his oath and attempted mass murder, he'd also crafted the perfect frame job. Who would suspect the heroic K-9 team that had discovered the plot? Who would question their access to secure areas and their intimate knowledge of airport security protocols? "Emma, I need you to listen very carefully," Sarah said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Everything I'm about to tell you could save thousands more lives." As Sarah began explaining the morning's events, Max positioned himself at the hangar entrance, his senses alert for any sign of approaching danger. Even in her desperation, Sarah felt a surge of gratitude for the loyal partner who had never once doubted her. never once questioned her judgment, and who was now the only ally she had left in a world where everyone else seemed to have turned against them. The afternoon sun was setting over Atlanta, and Sarah knew that when darkness fell, the real hunt would begin. The sound of approaching helicopters shattered the relative quiet of the abandoned hangar. Sarah counted at least 3 distinct rotor signatures, the deep thrum of police aircraft mixed with the higher pitch of federal response units. They'd been found. "Move, Max!" Sarah commanded, grabbing her gear and sprinting toward the hangar's rear exit. Max bounded ahead, his black and tan form barely visible in the dim light filtering through grimy windows. As they burst through the back door, Sarah's phone buzzed with an incoming text from Emma. "Stadium attack planned tonight. 50,000+ targets. Trust no one from APD. Find Detective Rodriguez, he's clean." The message confirmed Sarah's worst fears, while providing a lifeline. Detective Carlos Rodriguez had been her mentor during her first years on the force, a 30-year veteran who'd retired 2 years earlier with an impeccable reputation. If anyone could help them navigate this conspiracy, it would be Rodriguez. But first, they had to survive the next hour. Sarah and Max moved through the industrial maze of cargo containers and service vehicles that surrounded the airport's freight area. Behind them, she could hear the coordinated shouts of search teams spreading out from the hangar. Hayes had mobilized significant resources, too many for a simple manhunt. "They're treating us like armed terrorists," Sarah muttered, guiding Max between 2 shipping containers. "Which means Hayes has convinced everyone we're the real threat." Max suddenly froze, his ears rotating toward a sound Sarah couldn't detect. 3 seconds later, she heard it too, the distinctive whine of drone rotors. Hayes was using surveillance drones to track them, turning their escape into a high-tech hunting expedition. Sarah pulled Max into the shadow of an abandoned fuel truck, pressing herself against the rusted metal as a small surveillance drone passed overhead. Through her radio earpiece, she could hear the search coordinators exchanging information. "Thermal imaging shows 2 signatures moving southeast toward the perimeter fence," a voice reported. "K9 unit is heading for Sector 7. The clinical efficiency of the operation chilled Sarah. These weren't corrupt cops stumbling through a cover-up. This was a professional military-style manhunt orchestrated by someone with serious resources and training. Moving from cover to cover, Sarah and Max worked their way toward the airport's southern boundary, where Rodriguez lived in a quiet suburb just beyond the industrial zone. But as they reached the perimeter fence, Max's behavior changed dramatically. Instead of following Sarah toward the fence line, he suddenly veered toward a seemingly empty maintenance shed. "Max, what are you doing?" Sarah hissed, but her partner was already alerting on something inside the small building. Following Max's lead, Sarah discovered that the shed contained sophisticated communications equipment, multiple radio sets, computer terminals, and what appeared to be a command center for coordinating the search operation. But more disturbing were the detailed maps spread across a central table, showing not just the airport layout, but also Mercedes-Benz Stadium, State Farm Arena, and Truist Park. Each venue was marked with red X's, indicating optimal locations for chemical weapon deployment. Sarah photographed everything with her phone, her hands shaking as she realized the scope of Hayes' plan. The airport attack had been just the beginning, a test run for a series of coordinated strikes designed to kill tens of thousands of people across Atlanta's major venues. A schedule on the wall showed tonight's target, Mercedes-Benz Stadium, where the Atlanta Falcons were hosting Monday Night Football. Capacity, 71,000 people. "Jesus Christ," Sarah whispered, reading the detailed timeline. "They're going to hit the game during halftime, when everyone's concentrated in the concourses." Max's growling interrupted her horrified fascination with the plans. Through the shed's small window, Sarah could see 4 tactical officers approaching their position, moving with the practiced coordination of a SWAT team. Sarah grabbed the most critical documents and stuffed them into her tactical vest. "Max, we need to go. Now." They slipped out the shed's rear door just as the tactical team breached the front entrance. Running through the darkness toward Rodriguez's neighborhood, Sarah's mind raced through the implications of what she'd discovered. Hayes wasn't just a corrupt cop. He was the operational commander of a domestic terrorism cell with resources that suggested foreign backing or military connections. 20 minutes later, Sarah stood on Rodriguez's front porch, praying that her former mentor would trust her enough to listen. When the 60-year-old retired detective opened his door, his weathered face immediately showed recognition and concern. "Sarah, what the hell is going on? The news is saying you're wanted for—" "It's all lies, Carlos. I need your help." Sarah quickly explained the morning's events, while Rodriguez studied the documents she'd recovered from the command shed. "This is bigger than departmental corruption," Rodriguez said grimly. "This is a coordinated attack on American infrastructure. How many people does Hayes have working with him?" "I don't know, but they've got military-grade equipment and federal resources. They're planning to hit the Falcons game tonight." Rodriguez reached for his phone. "I still have contacts in federal law enforcement who are clean. People who worked cases with me before Hayes ever showed up in Atlanta." As Rodriguez made his calls, Sarah knelt beside Max and reviewed everything they'd learned. Her partner had detected the initial chemical weapons, identified Hayes as a threat before her conscious mind recognized the danger, and led her to the command center that revealed the full scope of the conspiracy. "You've been trying to tell me all along, haven't you?" she asked Max softly. "About Hayes, about the real threat. I promise I'll listen to your instincts from now on." Max pressed his head against her hand, and Sarah felt the familiar surge of confidence that came from their partnership. They'd uncovered a terrorist conspiracy, survived a manhunt, and identified the next target. Now they had less than 3 hours to prevent a massacre at one of America's most iconic sporting venues. The real test was just beginning. The Mercedes-Benz Stadium rose against the Atlanta skyline like a gleaming fortress, its retractable roof open to the Monday night sky as 71,000 football fans streamed through the entrance gates. Sarah crouched behind a maintenance vehicle in the stadium's service area, watching through binoculars as FBI Special Agent Maria Santos coordinated the largest counter-terrorism operation in Georgia's history. "Collins, we've got 12 federal agents positioned throughout the stadium, plus bomb disposal units and chemical response teams," Santos reported through Sarah's earpiece. "But without your partner's detection capabilities, we could spend hours searching and still miss devices hidden in the ventilation system." Sarah looked down at Max, who was wearing a specialized tactical vest equipped with communication gear and a live feed camera. The Belgian Malinois was focused and ready, but Sarah couldn't shake the knowledge that they were walking into a trap. Hayes knew Max's capabilities better than anyone. He'd been planning for this confrontation. Rodriguez confirmed that Hayes has at least 6 operatives inside the stadium, all posing as security personnel. Santos continued, "They've been planning this for months, Sarah. Every detail has been rehearsed." "Udril." The weight of responsibility settled on Sarah's shoulders like a lead blanket. 71,000 innocent people were enjoying what they thought was a normal football game, unaware that they were sitting targets for the largest chemical weapons attack in American history. "Max, are you ready for this?" Sarah asked quietly, running her fingers through her partner's fur. Max looked up at her with those intelligent brown eyes that had never failed to provide comfort. But today, Sarah saw something new in his expression, a grim determination that matched her own. As they entered the stadium through a service entrance, Max immediately began working. His nose moved methodically through the air, sorting through thousands of scents to identify the chemical signatures he'd been trained to detect. Within minutes, he alerted on a ventilation intake near the North Concourse. "First device located," Sarah reported. "Max is indicating chemical weapons in the HVAC system, section N7. The bomb disposal team moved in, while Sarah and Max continued their sweep. But as they approached the West Concourse, Max suddenly stopped and turned toward the crowd of fans walking past. His ears went back, and he issued the low growl that Sarah had learned meant immediate danger. Not from chemicals, but from hostile humans. Following Max's gaze, Sarah spotted him. Captain Hayes, wearing a stadium security uniform and positioned near a concession stand where hundreds of families were buying snacks during halftime. He was carrying what appeared to be a maintenance tablet, but Sarah knew it was likely the detonation device for the chemical weapons they were discovering throughout the building. "Santos, I have visual on Hayes, West Concourse, near the Pizza Hut stand. He's got the trigger device. All units, this is command. Primary target identified. Move to intercept." But Hayes had spotted Sarah and Max as well. His hand moved toward his concealed weapon as his eyes locked with Sarah's across the crowded concourse. The standoff lasted perhaps 2 seconds. Then Hayes pulled out a pistol and fired 3 shots toward the ceiling. Panic erupted instantly. Thousands of fans began screaming and running in all directions, creating a chaotic stampede that made any coordinated police response nearly impossible. In the confusion, Hayes began moving toward what Sarah realized was his ultimate target, the stadium's central air handling unit, located directly beneath the field. "Max, track!" Sarah commanded, releasing her partner to pursue Hayes through the crowd. Max moved like a guided missile through the panicking masses, his low profile and training allowing him to navigate the chaos while Sarah fought to keep up. Hayes was heading for a maintenance stairwell that would take him directly to the stadium's mechanical systems, where he could manually trigger the chemical weapons if his remote detonation failed. The pursuit led through service corridors and maintenance areas that Hayes knew intimately. As they descended toward the stadium's lower levels, Sarah realized they were being herded into a predetermined kill zone. Hayes had planned for this contingency, and he was leading them exactly where he wanted them. The mechanical room housing the central air handling unit was a maze of pipes, ducts, and machinery that created perfect cover for an ambush. Sarah entered cautiously, her service weapon drawn, while Max moved ahead to locate Hayes's position. "You should have died at the airport, Collins." Hayes's voice echoed from somewhere in the mechanical maze. "Would have been cleaner that way, more heroic." "Why, Hayes? Why kill innocent people?" "Because sometimes the system needs to be shocked into change. These people, they're sheep. They need something to wake them up, make them understand what real security looks like." Sarah moved carefully through the machinery, following Max's subtle directional signals. Her partner had located Hayes, but was waiting for the optimal moment to strike. "You're talking about mass murder, not political change. I'm talking about necessary sacrifice. The weak die, the strong adapt, and America becomes what it needs to be to survive." The ideological fanaticism in Hayes's voice chilled Sarah more than his tactical skills. This wasn't just corruption or greed. It was the worldview of someone who genuinely believed that genocide could be justified for political purposes. Max suddenly erupted from behind an air conditioning unit, hitting Hayes with 70 pounds of trained aggression. The impact sent Hayes's weapon flying as he crashed into a control panel, but Hayes recovered quickly, pulling a combat knife and slashing at Max's exposed flank. "No!" Sarah screamed, firing 2 shots that caught Hayes' center mass and dropped him permanently. As Sarah knelt beside Max to check his wounds, she heard Santos's voice through her earpiece. "All devices secured, chemical weapons neutralized. Stadium is safe." Max's injury was superficial, a shallow cut that would require stitches but hadn't hit anything vital. As Sarah pressed her hand against the wound to stop the bleeding, Max looked up at her with an expression that seemed to say, "We did it. We saved them all." Above them, 71,000 people were safely evacuating the stadium, unaware of how close they'd come to becoming victims of the deadliest terrorist attack in American history. Sarah held her partner close, feeling the familiar surge of pride and gratitude that came from their partnership. They'd faced the ultimate test of trust and loyalty and emerged victorious together. 3 months after the Mercedes-Benz Stadium incident, Sarah Collins stood in the packed courtroom of the Federal District Court of Northern Georgia, watching Judge Richard Thornton deliver the final sentences in what the media had dubbed The Sarin Conspiracy. Max sat beside her in his formal ceremonial collar, the small scar on his flank barely visible beneath his perfectly groomed coat. Marcus Wheeler, for conspiracy to commit acts of terrorism, attempted murder of civilians, and treason against the United States of America. This court sentences you to 40 years in federal prison without possibility of parole, Judge Thornton announced, his voice carrying the weight of absolute finality. Wheeler, once the confident federal agent who had stood beside Hayes at the airport, now appeared hollow and defeated. The three other conspirators, agents Sarah had trusted, men who had sworn oaths to protect and serve, received sentences ranging from 25 to 35 years each. But it was the final case that provided Sarah with the deepest sense of closure. The defendant, Robert Hayes, was killed while resisting arrest during the commission of terrorist acts, Judge Thornton stated for the record. However, this court wishes to acknowledge that his death prevented what would have been the largest loss of civilian life from a terrorist attack in American history. The judge turned toward Sarah and Max. "Detective Collins, would you please approach the bench?" Sarah walked forward with Max at her heel, feeling the eyes of the packed courtroom, including Hayes' family members, victim advocates, and dozens of reporters, following their every step. The weight of the moment wasn't lost on her. 3 months ago, she had been a fugitive accused of terrorism. Today, she was being honored as a national hero. "Detective Collins and K9 Officer Max," Judge Thornton continued, "your actions on the morning of September 15th and your subsequent investigation prevented the deaths of an estimated 91,000 American citizens across multiple venues in Atlanta. This court, on behalf of a grateful nation, recognizes your service with the highest commendation possible under federal law." The courtroom erupted in sustained applause as Sarah accepted the Presidential Medal of Valor on behalf of herself and Max. But for Sarah, the real validation had come weeks earlier during the FBI's comprehensive investigation that revealed the full scope of the conspiracy. Hayes' terrorist cell had been part of a larger domestic extremist network with connections to foreign actors seeking to destabilize American society through mass casualty events. The investigation uncovered evidence of planned attacks in 6 other major cities, all of which were prevented thanks to intelligence gathered from Hayes' operational files. Agent Wheeler's cooperation had led to the arrest of 47 additional conspirators across 3 countries, effectively dismantling one of the most sophisticated terrorist networks ever discovered on American soil. As Sarah and Max left the courthouse, they were greeted by a crowd of well-wishers that included many of the airport and stadium employees whose lives they had saved. A little girl approached Max with a handmade sign reading, "Thank you, hero dog," and Max graciously accepted her gentle pats with the dignity that had always characterized his public appearances. "Detective Collins," called out Rebecca Martinez from Channel 5 News, "how does it feel to know that you and Max prevented the largest terrorist attack in American history?" Sarah paused, considering her words carefully. "Max and I were just doing our job. The real heroes are the first responders, federal agents, and ordinary citizens who trusted us when we said there was danger. This was never about individual heroism. It was about people working together to protect their community." But privately, Sarah knew the truth was more complex. She and Max had succeeded not because of superior training or equipment, but because of something far more fundamental: the absolute trust between partners who had learned to rely on each other's instincts without question. 6 months later, Sarah received a phone call that would have changed her life forever if she had been interested in changing it. "Detective Collins, this is Director Harrison from the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit. We'd like to offer you a position as a senior instructor at our facility in Quantico. The salary would be triple your current compensation, and you'd be training the next generation of federal agents." Sarah looked across her apartment at Max, who was contentedly chewing on his favorite rope toy. The Belgian Malinois was now 8 years old, with a few grey hairs around his muzzle that made him look distinguished rather than aged. "I'm honored by the offer, Director Harrison, but I'm going to have to decline. May I ask why? This is a prestigious position that would utilize your unique experience with domestic terrorism cases." Sarah walked to her window and looked out at the Atlanta skyline, where the lights of Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport twinkled in the distance. "Because my partner and I belong here. Atlanta is our city, and these are our people to protect." After ending the call, Sarah sat beside Max and scratched behind his ears. "What do you think, partner? Ready for another day of keeping Atlanta safe?" Max looked up at her with those intelligent brown eyes that had never failed to provide comfort and guidance. His tail wagged slowly, and Sarah interpreted the gesture as she always had. "Wherever you go, I go. Whatever we face it together." The following morning, Sarah and Max reported for duty at Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, where they had been assigned permanent security detail as part of the enhanced counter-terrorism measures implemented after the sarin conspiracy. As they walked through the busy terminal, Sarah noticed the small memorial plaque that had been installed near the south terminal entrance. In recognition of Detective Sarah Collins and K9 Officer Max, whose vigilance and courage prevented a terrorist attack at this location on September 15, 2024. Their actions saved thousands of lives and exemplify the highest ideals of law enforcement service. But for Sarah, the real memorial was simpler and more personal. It was the sound of children laughing as they boarded planes with their families, the sight of business travelers hurrying to catch flights, the normal chaos of people living their lives without fear. She and Max had preserved that normalcy, and they would continue to protect it for as long as they were able to serve. As they began their morning patrol, Max's ears perked up at a familiar sound, the announcement of Flight 447 to Miami preparing for departure from Gate 23. Sarah smiled, remembering how their greatest case had begun with that same flight number. "Come on, partner," she said to Max. "Let's make sure everyone gets home safe today." Together, they walked into another day of protecting the city they loved, their partnership stronger than ever, and their dedication to justice as unwavering as the Georgia sun rising over Atlanta.